Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Collison. I'm here with Hannah Lomax. We're talking today about how to improve your hybrid work experience using strengths and specifically Clifton Strengths. Hannah, welcome to this LinkedIn Live.
Thank you, Jim. Great to be back.
Great to have you here. We'll have some folks joining us live. If you're joining us live for the very first time, you can, or even if you're a repeat offender, you can jump in there and put your top five in the chat. We'd love to see that. And then we're asking this question: How do you prefer? How do you prefer to work for you? Is it hybrid? Is it in the office? Is it completely remote? So throw that in the chat room. We'd love to hear from you on that. Hannah, let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about where you're located and what you do for Gallup.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm based in the London office and I come in about 2 to 3 times per week, typically Monday and Friday from home. My top 5 strengths are positivity, futuristic, learner, responsibility, and focus. And I'm a senior business solutions consultant, which in short term really means that I partner with business leaders to build great places to work.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just so great to have you on here. Just a reminder again, if you're listening on LinkedIn Live, you want to throw your top five in the chat, or we were asking this question: how do you prefer to work? Since we're spending some time thinking about that today, of hybrid work and the experience and using your Clifton Strengths for that. Do you prefer remote, hybrid, or in the office? Hannah, let me throw that question to you. For you, what has worked? Like, how do you prefer? What kind of mode is working for you right now?
Mm. So I'm typically in about 2 to 3 times per week, although I will say it very much depends on my workflow. I have Woo at number 6, and I'm just going to shamelessly blame that for the fact that when I come in, like not a lot of work gets done. So I have to be kind of mindful around what's on my plate. Thankfully, I have focus at 5. So if I am in the office, like today, for example, where I know that I just need to get a ton of stuff done, I kind of go into a little meeting room. I put like a post-it note, like, please don't talk to me or I'm going to get nothing done. And I definitely want to hear from you. So it kind of depends on workflow. But yeah, I do like to come in kind of 2 or 3 times per week if it's not too busy.
Yeah, I think we've done some research that talks about. I think half of individuals are working, working remotely. The
Yeah.
other half going into the office. There are some in that hybrid space, right? We'll talk about those numbers here kind of in just a second. Just a reminder, if you're listening live, love to have you throw your top five in the chat room, if you would. We want to know, we're asking the question: what do you prefer, remote, hybrid, or in the office, or a combination? Hannah, I think I've settled in nicely to kind of some weeks I'm here all 5 days. Some
Mm.
weeks I'm maybe picking 3 of the days. Some weeks I might be remote most of the time, kind of depending upon what's the need. And then really, and maybe we'll talk about this with your Clifton Strengths, how I'm feeling that week about getting the job done, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about getting your job done, right? In that,
Mm.
can you
Mm.
talk a little bit about? Let's spend a little time thinking about that. And again, a reminder: if you're joining us live on LinkedIn, throw your top five in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And the question we're asking is: how do you prefer to work, remote, hybrid, in the office, or whatever you're calling it, however it's working for you? Hannah, talk a little bit about our research. I alluded to it, but spend a little more time on it.
Yeah, of course. So 50% of people, they want a hybrid option. Right now, about 4 in 10 people have that as an option. 3 in 10 people want to be in all the time, and about 2 in 10 people want completely work from home. Um, the interesting thing is now, and I think this is the real kind of kicker when leaders start to think about what's best for their organization, is that most people, about 8 in 10, expect to have the option of flexibility around hybrid. We, as you know, and there's heaps of research on this on kind of Gallup's website if you are curious, but we've done some interesting studies on this. And actually, I think the biggest kind of finding that I came over when I was starting to think about this a little more was Gallup actually asked people who were completely remote, if this was taken away from you right now, like if you were forced on site, would you look for another job? Most people said they would look for another job. 60% of people said they would look for another job. So it's really, I think, about giving people that choice and that autonomy and that kind of flexibility around being able to wake up in the morning and say, today is not a good day for me to go in, and do what feels right for them.
Just this morning I had this situation where we'd actually scheduled this and had a scheduling kind of misunderstanding about when we were starting this. So I actually logged in from home to start with, and then the three of us got together and we were like, well, we should probably wait an hour. So I actually closed things up, drove into the office. I kind of wanted to be in this spot for these. I
Mm.
like doing the work here. I could have done it from home, or remotely from that perspective. So that kind of worked out well for me. Again, we're talking about how to improve a hybrid work experience using your strengths and specifically your Clifton strengths. So let me ask you that question, Hannah. How can you use your individual strengths to improve that? I have a Ranger number one. So this morning was an adaptability 7. This morning was no issue. I was going to be able to do it there or do it here. We even early had a technical issue with this, and I thought we were going to have to start over. That's fine. See, that works for me, right? Maybe not work that way for others, but how can we use our individual strengths to improve hybrid work, you think?
Yeah, great question. I think it's really about knowing yourself. So even that example earlier, like with Woo, it's just a nightmare having me in. I don't think anyone gets stuff done. But therefore, being aware of that with high focus, I go into a room and I figure it out. I think, for some people with high relationship building themes, if they need that kind of in-person contact, again, being aware of that, it means that perhaps the people that they're close to in their circle, they all pick a day that they come in, they clear their schedules, and it's that collective kind of thinking time. For others, maybe with high discipline, where it's very much around routine and structure. Again, if they can find a kind of a schedule that works for their particular strengths, it's just going to feel better. I mean, the examples that you've given are brilliant, Jim, like your arranger and adaptability. That stuff is a nightmare for me. I'm futuristic strategic, like I need a plan. But kind of knowing that, it means that you can start to figure out where it's going to work really well and where you're going to struggle a bit more. And if you think about then expanding that to others around you, or your manager, or if you are a manager, your team member, because all of our strengths show different needs, you can really help people find a way that feels the most energizing for them.
Yeah, and I do want to be sensitive to individuals. Every time we talk about hybrid work, I hear from individuals who are like, I don't get the option to be hybrid, and for various reasons, right? I mean, there are some who could, where the employers say they can't. Then there are others where
Mm.
the job just requires it. You need to be there to do that. And so
Mm.
we do want to acknowledge that not all roles will support hybrid or remote only, or some of them require folks to be on site. So we do want to acknowledge that in that. But thinking about for me, I actually have been shifting my role kind of based on the week. Sometimes I'm
Mm.
in all 5 days. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes it's half and half. I've been kind of doing it kind of based on the way I feel and what I need. But what are the benefits? Let's talk through this a little bit for those who have the ability to be hybrid or to work hybrid. What are the benefits in the first place? I mean, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, I mean heaps, right? And of course there's also drawbacks, which I'm sure we'll get to, but what we found really is some of the benefits that stand out the most are around kind of the well-being side of things. Um, Often things connected to flexibility around a family life, being able to get to the gym because you've got that time back instead of being stuck in traffic or on a train. You can actually invest that time in, your physical health, for example. Um, Avoiding the commute came up as a big benefit. I resonate with that, living in London 100%. Love the days where I don't have to do that. But also productivity was actually higher for those that had the kind of hybrid option. And when you think about just the time spent, on the commute that you would be losing, of course, that's one point. But I think also, I don't know if you guys have this, and sometimes it's great, but when you're in the office, people just talk more. Like, it's easier to go over and ask someone a question than maybe think about perhaps finding the answers first, or is this really important? So I guess kind of from a time standpoint, you're going to get more stuff done when you do have that option. So yeah, they were the kind of things that came up the most, and a decline in burnout super interesting to see that study as well.
Yeah. Although, just from the other side of the coin on this,
Yeah.
going into the office with people can be, for some, for who maybe have high woo or high communication, right? High positivity, can be more
Mm,
distracting. And you could be in the office all day and know that you didn't get anything done because you
mm,
spent all that time talking, right, to people or spending time with people. So I think it's not I think sometimes we say that, like, oh yeah, when we're together, and the studies do show the productivity is higher oftentimes when we're in person. But I
mm.
think also based on your strengths and also based on who you are, you've got to know, like, okay, I need to probably make sure I'm setting myself up for success to be able to get things done. Any other, when you think of, like, when you think of the drawbacks, you mentioned that a little bit earlier.
Mhm.
Mention a few of those as well, because I think sometimes we think it's all just sunshine, and it's not. Let's talk about those. What are some drawbacks?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think again, with the option to be at home a little more, to your point, again, it's going to relate to your strengths immensely.
Yeah,
But if you are from home, it's kind of things like access to maybe some of the resources. There's often two screens and a really nice chair in the office, free paper, pens, that kind of stuff, great Wi-Fi. So it can be a little frustrating at home not to have access to some of those things. The research is saying, and again, it's going to depend very much on your role, your industry, your strengths, of course, but the research is showing that there's fewer opportunities for that sort of collaboration and I guess that shared thinking, those ideas that come out of just a random conversation. But you've also got less opportunities, I guess, less organic opportunities for feedback as well. So I think, again, when you're around people and you're hearing conversations and you're bumping into each other around the office, you're probably more likely to mention, a piece of recognition or pull them into a room and do a little bit of a feedback session off the back of something because you've got that right in front of you. But if you're at home, it's not that you can't do them, it's that you've got to be really conscious and intentional about making those opportunities, hence the power of,
yeah.
regular meaningful conversations with your managers and friends.
Yeah. I want to talk about leaders here in a second, but we have a couple comments coming in that I want to address. Edna says, although I do prefer hybrid, I'm currently looking for a remote role with financial services and executive system project management in any other industry. So Lisa mentions, she says, I'm getting out of the house and going to a co-working space, which is another way of thinking about remote or hybrid. When we think
Mm,
about that, it's not always have to be work from home. That was a common, during COVID, that was really, really common because that's where we needed to be. But co-working spaces may be another option for individuals, especially when we think about the commute. I'll mention that here, how my commute's changed since COVID, but because working from home doesn't work well for me. Yeah, too much isolation. And then Karen checks in and says, I prefer hybrid if I'm located close to the office. If I'm 30 plus miles away, I prefer
mm.
working from home. I actually have two routes on my way into Gallup. I have a back roads and I have the interstate. And after COVID, I've been taking the back roads because I don't like the stress of the interstate. Right.
Yes.
And so for me, that was just a minor change to make in the way I got to work. Again, kind of based on, I was getting to work, tense, and I was like, I'm just gonna take the back roads. Take me 10 minutes more, but it's just a more enjoyable experience. We know managers are challenged in this hybrid, and a lot of the data we have coming back is saying so. So, Hannah, what can managers do to improve this as we think about this hybrid work experience that we're in? What can they do to help improve it?
Yeah, they can do a lot, but I think exactly to kind of echo your point, it's such a minefield now, and it's so specific on the role, the industry, the team that you've got, the global disparity as well. So whilst there's kind of a lot laid out in front of you, I think a few of the things that managers can really think about is, firstly, what are the needs of that team? So if you've got, people that perhaps are in kind of maybe quite isolated roles that even if they came in, they wouldn't necessarily need to talk to one another. And the team are saying, actually, it's working really well for us. Why would you push them to come in if that's going to be kind of not their optimal way of working. However, with that said, how can you keep that connectivity between them? So definitely think about like the structure of the role and the structure of the team. Even things like time zones, like if you're part of a big organization, or if you're building an organization that's global, how can people connect when they're, completely spread across the world? So when you're partnering people up in teams, or even as kind of friends in the organization, thinking about what's within your control to create more opportunities for those kind of regular touch points. An interesting thing that I read recently was like the person that makes the decision around the hybrid strategy is as important as the strategy itself. So if you're in those shoes, listen to your team, make it kind of a shared conversation, have them involved in that decision making. The thing that's going to drive people out is to say you have to do X, Y, Z, because the company next door, if they're not doing that, it's going to turn heads a little bit. So yeah, I think being involved with what the team needs are. But then again, just knowing strengths. Like, I am a nightmare when I come in, and I know that, but I can kind of manage that myself. So if you've got a manager who knows their team's strengths, you can start to think about the nature of that group and how they feel and what they need, but also what's going to get in their way. So tapping into that can be really powerful.
Lisa says out in chat, she says, appreciate what Hannah said about feedback being at work. Also helps us get those subtle social cues that give us feedback on how well we're working together. There were some moments where we couldn't be together, and I would during those times, I would just open a call with folks. We just leave it open, and we'd be working together, but the call would be open. Not a perfect replacement for that, but as we think about these strategies for work, for hybrid, and how maybe not, the complexity of this is maybe not everybody's on the same schedule. Some folks may be staying or working remotely Monday and Friday. Some may do it in the middle of the week and come in on those 2 days, kind of based on what works best for them. But I think we need to continue to think about both in person and remotely. What are some new strategies that we may need to put in place to make that work most effective? I think for managers as well, they're under the most amount of pressure right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the world has changed around them. It was maybe much easier to do that in person, where today it's a challenge because you've got people all over the place. Any other struggles, Hannah, as we look at this? What are some of those other struggles? You alluded to a few of them, but what do you think? What are some other struggles for managers?
So I think when it's vague, it's a nightmare, because you're going to get this kind of conflict between the employers kind of said, like, we think you should come in, but it's up to you. And employers are like, oh, great, that means I can work from home. Employees, sorry. And then you've got this kind of disconnect in expectations. Again, Q1 at the base of the Q12 survey when we think about employee needs. But if you're building a strategy, the critical thing is to be really clear in what it means and to be okay with that. None of this kind of, we're saying this, but what we'd really like is this. It's got to be absolutely crystal clear. And then I think as well, there's so much going on in the way of the customer. Every business is designed to build and serve and retain customers. So hybrid strategies need to think about keeping that in mind. And to your earlier point, Jim, like for some organizations, they don't have that choice. But if they do have that choice and employees are leaning into it, does that still serve the customer in the best possible way? One of the challenges that we've seen in the data as well is that if people are working on site, but they could do their job at home. So maybe like a desk-based job, but they could do it at home, but their employers have kind of forced them in. They are much less engaged. They are much more burnt out. They're much more likely to leave. And it's just worse than if the employers had just said, you could do this from home, so why don't you? That's a big risk.
Yeah, indeed. I get the opportunity. Not everybody gets this opportunity as well, but I kind of work hybrid even when I'm in person here on location. I have a couple different, I'm in my office now, and this is an area where I can come and shut the door. It's set up for a specific purpose. When we need to be in the studio, I have a studio location that we can go to. And then I have a standing desk that's kind of it's open. Anybody could take it at any time. It's not my spot, but that's where I go when I want to work with individuals. So for me, that creates a sense of culture. I can go and be around. And then sometimes actually I work in the atrium here in our facility, just an open area where people can come and I may run into some people. All that for me creates culture. So if we think about sometimes the what we're talking about here is creating culture that works for people, right? Talk a little bit about how in this, whether we're physically together or not, how can we still continue to create culture in this? What are some strategies to help to help teams, managers continue to move forward and still continue to build culture?
Yeah. And this again has been a real challenge for so many organizations and leaders. I think, again, being clear on what culture exists within your organization, like what is our culture and how are we really bringing that to life? So when you think about kind of the values within the organization, if one of my clients I spoke to this morning, one of their key values is innovation. So they're globally dispersed. A lot of their teams are remote. And so we were thinking through how they can really live that value and kind of make sure that it's top of mind. So they've got to be very intentional about creating space for employees to have sparking conversations that do create these new ideas. So I think once you've got an idea on what culture you have and what culture you want, if there's a gap, then, that's a whole nother ball game. You should go through a culture audit and kind of fix that first. But when you've really got clearly in mind what the culture is within your organization, start thinking about how can you contribute to that culture and what do you need? And for managers, again, if teamwork is one of the kind of values within the culture, what are you doing to create those spaces that enable that to happen? And again, role modeling it. I think there can feel like a little bit of a disconnect for people when they're not really there. They're just logging on. It can feel quite transactional. If you can reconnect people to the mission and the purpose of the organization as well, that's going to play a huge part in why we're all here. And I think that connection to mission and purpose as well, if you're communicating that clearly to the business, celebrating wins, talking about challenges in how we can continue overcoming these to reach that mission and purpose, that's all, part of, I think, what the organization stands for and therefore its culture.
We titled this topic here today, Improving Your Hybrid Work Experience Using Strengths. And we spent a lot of time talking about what's happening today and then the struggle that we're having to pull it all together. We talked a little bit about culture. Let's kind of wrap this up, bringing that strengths part back in. And if we're building culture, and especially if we want to be a strengths-based culture, what are some questions we can be asking specific to strengths, right? That would help managers or help individuals or help teams then continue to grow in this time of hybrid or whatever that culture turns out to be, right? It's going to be different for everybody. What kind of questions can we be asking, Hannah, to help with that culture, help build that culture in a strengths-based way?
Yeah, I love this. So I love the bring and need. So what do we bring and what do we need at an individual level? And of course, if you've got Cascade, you can get that at the team level as well. And that can start to help you think about, if you have a certain strength, restorative, that means you can bring, great solutions to problems. How are you bringing that? And are you getting the chance to really show up with that strength? If you're, not talking to anyone, you feel quite isolated, quite disconnected, where can you insert yourself to activate that strength? And what do you need? And what needs of the team are not being met? So if a manager can look at it through the lens of their team's strengths, they're going to get a really clear idea on how they can provide those opportunities for people to do what they do best. But of course, look at maybe any of those areas that we're not meeting or those gaps, potential blind spots, and think about what are some strategies that we can put into place to mitigate kind of the impact of that. The other thing that I think is brilliant is the best of us. So for those of you that don't know it, you learn about it on the Gallup Global Strengths coaching course. It's like a Johari's window. And I think in that, you get the best of me when, and you get the worst of me when. If it's to do with being around people, that's an immediate clue to we've got to get together more. We're going to do an offsite. We're going to spend Fridays with an optional lunch. That is a very, very quick way of helping managers to solve some of the challenges that they might be facing.
I think, honestly, we've struggled with this long before the last 5 years of maybe the work chaos that we have gone through. Building strengths-based teams and building strengths-based organizations is always intentional, right? And I always think of those first 4 questions on our engagement survey, right? I know what's expected of me. I've got the right materials and equipment. I get the opportunity to do what I do best every day. And then we have I'm getting great recognition for the good work that I'm doing. I think sometimes as we think about that, the scenario in this, we've just got to continue to ask those questions. If we're, well, when, however we're working, we need to open our conversations with, or close our conversations with, okay, we're done here. Do you know what's expected of you when we hang up this call, right? Or when we leave the office or whatever, right? And I think we've got to continue to, in U.S. terms, we'd say block and tackle, right? Those are the basics of, we got to get back to the basics. We've got to say, and I think sometimes we think those are reserved for annual meetings or for our strengths building exercises. No, I think those are actually conversations we need to have almost at every meeting. If we close the meetings by saying, everybody know what's expected of them, and is everybody aligned with what they're best at to do this, I think we're missing the point on all these. And so I think I'd throw in there start meetings and end meetings, just making sure all those things are covered, right? Making sure that everybody's lined up doing what they're doing, that's expected of them, they have the materials and equipment to do it. And then, did we have an opportunity to recognize each other? I mean, I think that's a great way. Just because we're remote, or just because we're back in person, or just because whatever, however that works for you, doesn't mean those things can't be happening. I know, Hannah, as we wrap it, you want to add anything to that? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jim. And I love that you used kind of the phrase conversation. I think one of the things that can get easily missed is we live in this world now where it's like super productivity oriented. Before the pandemic, we got some stuff done, and now we seem to be just doing a whole lot more. So it can be easy for those kind of quick connects or check-ins with friends at work to get pushed, or I've got to cancel this, I've got to get some work done, or a client needs me. And I think, when you're just kind of moving a Zoom meeting to some other time, and that disappears, and you're not physically around people where you do go and ask them how they are, how are their families, you've got to be super disciplined and actually hold each other to account to having those conversations. And managers, I think the scariest statistic that I've seen this year is that if you're not having one meaningful conversation with each and every one of your direct reports every week, you're in a high risk of quiet firing, which is super scary, right? But you can't let that go. So talk to your team members every week, connect them, see if there's a way that you can increase that frequency of regular touch points, even when you're not there in person.
Love that. Love that. As we're recording this here, April 13th, we're just less than 60 days away from the Gallup at Work Summit, which is happening June 5th, 6th, and 7th. We have both in-person and virtual options. Head out to gallupatwork.com to see what works for you. We'd love to have you here in person, but for not everybody, that'll work. And so this year, for the first year, we have both options available, which is going to be awesome. I've been wishing for that forever. My dream has come true, and this is going to be an awesome summit. But we have 2 sessions coming up there talking about remote work. One, Jeremy Breckheisen is going to spend some time thinking about reasons over rules, effective strategies for hybrid work policy making. I love that at the end, that policy making idea, he's in there. And then, of course, we have Benjamin Erickson Farr spending some time, and for our certified coaches, they know him. He's been to our learning sessions that we do. Effective leadership development. Hybrid and remote teams engage, connect, and thrive. And so we've got 2 great sessions coming up during the summit. Hannah, for you, any of those 2, I mean, if you had to attend one of those, you'll get a chance to do both. But if you could just attend one of those, what gets you excited about those titles?
Oh, I actually have the luxury of seeing Jeremy. He does come into the office every day. So spending some time with him, and the learner in me just picks his brains all the time. And I think some of the stuff that he's been sharing around exactly that, the policy piece is super interesting to me. So I will 100% watch both, but I think I'll definitely be excited to hear from Jeremy again.
Yeah, it'll be good. We're looking forward to it. Again, gallupatwork.com if you want to join us out there. If you're listening to this for the first time and you're like, oh, I want to get more of this kind of information, we have a couple podcasts that you might want to join and subscribe as well. This one, the Clifton Strengths podcast, we'll publish this out there. Just go on your podcast app and search Clifton Strengths podcast. We tried to make it pretty easy. And then on YouTube as well, search Clifton Strengths and you'll see that. And we want to thank you for coming out today. Love all your comments. Love the conversation. I guess, Hannah, keep the conversation going. It's still the same. It's still the same game. We need to communicate. We need to communicate expectations. Do we have everything that we need? Are we lined up in the right spot to be successful? And then how do we spend time recognizing? It's an age-old game that's been made a little more complicated, but we can do this. I know we can. Hannah, thanks for taking the time today to be a part of this. Always great to see you, and thanks for coming out.
Thank you so much.
For those listening live, thank you for doing that as well on LinkedIn, or whether you're maybe listening to this as a Clifton Strengths podcast. We'll do more of these. Make sure you follow us on a LinkedIn. Again, just search Clifton Strengths and follow our showcase page there. We'd love to have you a part of future conversations. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.